ShopGearNetwork.com.
The following is a presentation of the Gear Radio Network.
Ladies and gentlemen, this podcast is sponsored by our store through Amazon. If you visit ShopGear.com, please remember to do that, because when you do, you provide gasoline to the engine known as Gear Radio Network, and that helps this podcast continue. It is the best way to shop for yourself and is the best way to support this podcast. Now, on with the show.
You're listening to Better Live Than Dead.
With that, welcome to episode number 20 of Trust the Podcast. We call this one the Draftcast. I am at with me on Twitter, Ryan Wolfe. Not joined today by Del Reed. He unfortunately could not make the podcast, but that's okay. We have a very special guest here on the podcast. But first, don't forget, you can tune in and you can hear the Better Live Than Dead podcast. You can hear Trust the Podcast over at betterlivethandeadsports.com. You can also listen to us through iTunes or the Google Play Music app. But with that being said, without further ado, joining me on the IndyCard Media Hotline, we have New York Upstate's Buffalo Bills writer Ryan Talbot at Ryan Talbot Bills on Twitter. How you doing today, man?
Hey, I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on.
I appreciate you joining me. That was a lot of words to say in a small amount of time, so I appreciate you being patient with me there.
No problem at all.
But we're talking Buffalo Bills today, as the Trust the podcast always does. And with it being the first week of April, we've got the NFL draft just a few weeks away. And if you don't know by now, the Buffalo Bills currently own the 12th and 22nd overall pick. They're apparently looking to trade up like crazy into the top 3 or 5, which we'll talk about here in just a moment in our 3 big things. But first off, we'll talk about Brandon Beane making some moves. Now, the Buffalo Bills have shimmied their way up the draft board, up to the 12th overall pick, as mentioned. They still have the 22nd overall pick as well in their pocket as some kind of draft currency. Now, do you think this is it for the Bills? Or do you think there's something else up their sleeve, kind of like a Carson Wentz type move where they trade up, once, twice, 3 times to get to where they want to go? Or do you think that they will make a straight move from 12 to where they want to go? Or do you think that 12 is where they want to be?
I think ideally it's going to be a Carson Wentz-like situation for Brandon Beane if he can get that worked out ahead of time. The big thing is they don't move up from 21 to 12 if they're not looking to get into that mix to get one of the top 4 quarterbacks. And yes, there are some prospects at 12 that could immediately help the Bills, especially on the defensive side of the ball, like Roquan Smith out of Georgia, and a few other linebackers there. But when you're moving up to number 12 and you still have number 22, you're trying to keep moving up that draft board so you can be in play to get Josh Rosen, Josh Allen, Baker Mayfield. I think Sam Darnold's going number 1 overall, so I don't usually mention him when I'm talking about the quarterbacks, but Sam Darnold as well. They want to be in that place to get one of them. It's just a matter of, can they get that done? And I think it would have to be a Carson Wentz-like move. I don't think you're going to see a team in the top 5 that would necessarily want to move all the way down to number 12.
Which is totally fine. I know that's the hard part with the draft, is that you saw what the Jets did, and the Jets weren't too far back, but they still had to pay a large lump sum to move up. So that's, for me at least this year, that kind of tells me that, like you said, the Buffalo Bills need to get a little creative and need to take some of the capital they've built up with since Brandon Beane has really taken over. They've built some nice draft capital for a move like this, because as we know, we've both, I'm sure, watched enough football in our lifetimes, especially recently, to know that you need a quarterback to win in this league. And I mean, the Buffalo Bills did go out. They did sign A.J. McCarron to a small deal, and I want to talk about him real fast. A short-term, low-money deal. Really, it looks like a backup contract, but he'll have the opportunity to start now. If A.J. McCarron does win out in training camp and starts week 1 for the Bills, whether or not they draft a quarterback, where would you set some realistic expectations for A.J. McCarron this season if he does end up starting?
That's a great question, because we don't really know much about him as a starting quarterback. He didn't get the opportunity in Cincinnati, except for when Andy Dalton went down with an injury. He did he had the Bengals in position to win a playoff game against the Steelers, a few years ago. So I don't know if I can put a number on it in terms of how many wins you think he could get. But it's going to be interesting because for all the people that are happy to see Tyrod Taylor go, the one thing he did extremely well was keep plays alive. There were numerous plays that probably should have resulted in sacks last season that Taylor was able to elude the pressure, keep his eyes downfield, find some, even if it was a short drop-off, he was able to keep those plays alive where A.J. McCarron does not have that mobility. And if you look at Buffalo's offensive line, if they're going to say, okay, A.J. McCarron, you're going to be our guy at the start of the year, well, then they also need to address the offensive line somewhat early in this draft as well, because the left side, Deion Dawkins was great as a rookie. Richie Incognito still is playing at a very high level. But then you have 3 spots of uncertainty in front of him. You don't know who's going to win the center job, first of all. You would think that Ryan Groy could beat out Russell Bodine, who they just signed from Cincinnati. You don't know what's going to happen at right guard. Vlad DeCoste won that job last year, but John Miller battled injuries. Maybe he just doesn't fit that coaching, the Juan Castillo's coaching scheme. And then at right tackle, Jordan Mills held on to that job again, but he had a lot of up and down play. So if that's the line, I don't know if that right side can keep A.J. McCarron upright all season. So it's going to be interesting. I don't know what you can say in terms of how many wins can this guy get, but I think even if they draft a Josh Rosen or a Baker Mayfield early in the draft, they can trade up and get one of those guys. I still think that they might want to ease the rookie in and start the year with McCarron. And if McCarron starts 0-3, 0-4, well, then maybe you pull the trigger and you bring that rookie in at that point.
Now, that's always going to be the tough part, as being not only writing about the Bills and podcasting about the Bills, but just being fans and paying attention enough. The transition from quarterback to quarterback to quarterback is not been easy, because usually it doesn't get much better. And it's for me looking at it, I always see, I can tell, obviously they want to go out, they want to get their guy because it's a new regime. And usually when it comes to head coaches, when it comes to quarterbacks, those are the two things that get changed when new regimes come in. And we've already seen the head coach get changed and now the quarterback has changed. But you look at it, and Tyrod Taylor, like you said, he didn't do a lot of terrible things, but he didn't do a lot of great things. He was, you knew what he could do, and he could extend the plays, and he could do exactly, almost it felt like he knew what he needed to do to win football games. So now you bring in a new guy. You don't, like you said, you don't know what you're going to get either with McCarron or with a rookie. And that's kind of interesting, because we saw last year the Buffalo Bills took a big step forward and crushed that dogged curse that would never go away, it seemed like. But I mean, you say 0-3, 0-4, and I'm thinking to myself, like, I can't imagine going back to that so soon. But I mean, looking back at last season, the Buffalo Bills' expectations weren't very high. I remember telling Dell back this time, last year, like, hey, if the Bills go, 4-12, that's a win, because at least they'll win a few games and get a good draft pick. But I mean, things did work out, and it's crazy to me to sit here and think that the Buffalo Bills made the playoffs, yet we're still talking about which quarterback the Buffalo Bills are going to draft. To me, that seems crazy, because I thought, I figured that they would draft a quarterback, but if Tyrod brought them to the playoffs like he did, maybe he would stick around just a little longer. But again, it tells you, as the podcast title says, trust the process. There is an idea, there is a plan in place, and if you find a $20 bill in your pocket, found money it's pretty nice, and that's kind of what last year felt like, at least. So, looking forward though, seeing the smoke screens, we've already heard Buffalo tied to Josh Allen. Those are the rumors that the Buffalo Bills were in love with him. We've heard Buffalo tied to Sam Darnold, to Josh Rosen. We heard, they've met Baker Mayfield at least 4 times in the past as many months. So we obviously know Buffalo's going to go quarterback, whether it's at 12 or at 1 through 10. But for looking through all the smoke screens and the obvious misdirection here, which quarterback are you pairing up with the Buffalo Bills, and why would you be doing that?
I'm going to say Baker Mayfield or Josh Rosen. I know you said choose one, but I'm going to go with those two. And yeah, there's a lot of smoke screens this season, but both of those prospects are players that the Bills have met with numerous times. So they met with Baker Mayfield at the Senior Bowl, and then at the Combine, at his pro day, and then he has an official visit scheduled with the team. And I want to say it's the same 4 meetings for Josh Rosen because he has the same amount. I believe it is the same thing, or maybe it was a private workout. But he announced on the Rich Eisen podcast that he was going to be coming to Buffalo for a pre-draft visit as well. So maybe it'll be 5 for him if he had that private workout too. But it's going to be one of those two guys. And the reason I say it's going to be one of those two is I don't know how high the Bills are going to trade up. I think ideally they would like to get number 2 and get that giant spot. But if I'm Dave Gettleman, I'm more than willing to work on a deal with Brandon Beane, but I don't want to move farther down than 6 or 7. And my reasoning for that would be, okay, you're going to see 3 quarterbacks go in the first 4 picks because the Browns, I would be shocked if they didn't take one at number 1. The Bills in this scenario would be taking one at number 2, and the Jets would be taking one at number 3. Well, then at number 4, maybe Cleveland goes with Barkley or Chubb. Number 5, you still have one of those 2 guys on the board. You still have Quentin Nelson, the extraordinary guard out of Notre Dame, who I think first year could be an all-pro in this league. That's just how good he is. And then you have Minkah Fitzpatrick, and you have some other top-of-the-line defensive players that I would say maybe there's 8 guys in this draft where I would say if I'm in that area, I know I'm going to get one of these guys, and I wouldn't want to move farther down with that because once you lose those 8 players, there is a drop-off in terms of what you think you're going to be getting immediately from the prospect. So if I'm Gettleman, I'm saying, yeah, I'm willing to move down, but I have to stay in that area where I can get one of those impact guys right away. So maybe that means Buffalo, and maybe they go up to 4 with Cleveland. But I think Cleveland's going to try to keep both picks, to be quite honest. Denver at number 5. They just gave Case Keenum a big contract, so maybe they're not in the quarterback market this year, even though it's a 2-year deal. Indianapolis might be willing to move down from 6 to 12, although I'm not buying that either because one of the big things that their GM said was, one of the reasons that we were interested in making this deal with the Jets is we're moving down a few spots, but we're still going to get one of those impact players. So then you're looking at Tampa Bay, Chicago, San Francisco at 7, 8, and 9. And the good news for Buffalo is none of those teams need a quarterback. So they're not a risk at that point, but they might fall in love with one of those guys that I just mentioned. So it might be more difficult. So they're going to have to do, in my opinion, one of the Carson Wentz-like move and get the 7th, 8th, maybe the 9th pick from San Francisco. Even at 9, I think you might be kind of bordering at that. I'm not sure you can make that move from 2 to 9, but from 7 to 9, from 7 to 2, that's possible. From 5 to 2, absolutely. So they have to do that. And if they move up to number 2, I'm going to say Josh Rosen is their guy. He is the best natural passer in this draft class, in my opinion. He seems, a lot of people are knocking him because he asks questions. They're saying that he wants to know why they're running a certain play or what they're doing things. I actually think that would be a benefit. I would want a guy like that in my locker room saying, why are we doing this? Do we have a player that can stretch the field for this play? Do we have someone that makes sense in this? Why are we running this if we have a shoddy offensive line and it's a play action that takes additional time, so on and so forth? But I think he's the guy that can come and make an immediate impact. Baker Mayfield, I could see him actually going as high as number 3 to the Jets. But if the Jets passed on him for one of the other prospects, he might be the 4th quarterback that's remaining. And that's why I mentioned him, not just because they met with him so many times. I could see him being the 4th quarterback on the board of the big 4, so to speak. And he could, if he gets past the Jets, and then I would say the Broncos, because I'm still not sold on the Broncos passing on a quarterback, but if he gets past number 5, he could realistically fall to 8, 9, 10 range, where at that point Buffalo would want to jump over Miami if they're worried about Miami possibly taking him. So those would be the 2 guys that I would anticipate Buffalo having the most interest in.
I was going to say with Josh Rosen too, the one thing that I love, like you mentioned, he's not afraid to say what he thinks. or ask questions, or kind of, just I guess be abrasive. And that's not even really that's really the only word I could think of. It's not a terrible thing. I mean, being the woke quarterback in the draft, I'm cool with that, because you know what? Like, we know he's a smart kid. I know that rubs some of the older GMs the wrong way, but I feel like with a guy like Brandon Beane, who's not afraid to do things, outside the box, it seems like, I certainly think that Josh Rosen would be the fit in Buffalo. It's very difficult. I'm not sure. I know this is your job. For me, I'm very much, I try to remain neutral, but I'm still, at the end of the day, I've been a Bills fan my entire life. So it's, for me, I'm looking at it and I get kind of nervous, because I'm like, I really hope they don't screw this up. But with that being said, we've seen the top 5 quarterbacks that have all been talked up this past couple years now. And it doesn't feel like Buffalo really can miss too much. They may not go out and end up with the guy who's the best quarterback in the draft, but at the end of the day, you just need the best quarterback for your system. Now, the question I have for you about Rosen, though, we've heard a lot about it. We've seen last year he had a couple concussions. He struggled a little with that. Are you worried about that long term, or do you think that might just be something that's coming up now because they may be trying to kind of put a little water on the fire that's building up for Josh Rosen?
Well, concussions are always a concern, but the good thing is that there's going to be, I'm sure that he had to have some kind of testing done at the combine, and I'm sure that they've talked with the UCLA, all the teams, not just the Bills, have talked with the team doctors to get an idea of, are these serious concussions? How long was he out for? You don't want to say that there's such thing as a minimal concussion, because they are. Every single one of them takes a toll, does their damage. But at the same time, there's coaches there's doctors on that staff at UCLA that can tell the Bills how serious those concussions were, whether it's something that they should be worried about long term in the NFL. Because you're right, it's one of those things where we've seen players in this league that have come in, they've played a year or two, they've suffered a few concussions and they've retired early. It's kind of become a trend in the last few years for a few prospects every single year, younger players in this league that say, I got dinged up a few times in college. I've already suffered 1 or 2 here. I've made a couple $1 million because I was a first or second round pick, and I'm just going to take that money and leave because I want to have my long-term health intact. So it's definitely a concern, something that I'm sure that every team is doing their homework on when it comes to Rosen.
Now, looking at the Buffalo Bills, you mentioned a couple times wide receivers, catching passes, all that stuff, because naturally we're talking about quarterbacks. But this is actually a real question. I mean, clearly, aside really from Kelvin Benjamin, Zay Jones, and Andre Holmes, maybe. I mean, we've heard of Brandon Riley, a little Rod Streeter as well. Those aren't really big names that jump off the page. I mean, we just saw, Jordan Matthews go to New England. We've seen a couple other big wide receivers sign already. There's not much left there. With Buffalo having such a very clear weakness at a position that is so important. I mean, if you have a quarterback, you need people who can catch the ball and who can separate and be a difference maker. How can Buffalo shore up this quite obvious and glaring weakness that they have?
Well, I don't know if they can shore it up, so to speak, but the good news is if they get a quarterback that is the long-term answer, that is a franchise QB, he will make the players around him better, and that includes the wide receivers. The one thing that I'll say about Tyrod Taylor, and I'm trying not to knock the guy, I'm wishing him the best in Cleveland, but he didn't anticipate throws. He waited for guys to get open. And to be quite honest, the Bills don't have the type of wide receivers that are meant to get open, so to speak, on their own. They don't create that separation, I guess is the best way to put it. So it would be good to have a quarterback like a Josh Rosen or a Baker Mayfield that can anticipate where the wide receivers are supposed to be, get the ball where it's supposed to be when they're even in their breaks still, or coming out of their breaks. And that can make players a lot better, because all of a sudden then there's yards after catch. That's something that you didn't see much because he waited for them to get open. By the time the ball got delivered, there wasn't a lot of that opportunities for them to get those additional yards down the field, so on and so forth. I don't think they're going to necessarily shore it up this year. And some of the guys that you mentioned, most teams would look at this depth chart and say, well, hopefully a Rod Streeter, a Malachi Dupree, a Quan Bray, a Brandon Riley, they can come in and compete for that 5th wide receiver spot, not number 3, not number 4, which right now on the depth chart, that's how it kind of looks, because Andre Holmes, he had some contributions last year, especially in the red zone, but he's even more of a special teams guy. That's one of the big reasons they brought him aboard. So they have a lot of uncertainty behind Kelvin Benjamin and Zay Jones. So you want to at least find one guy in this draft that can come in and be an immediate contributor in terms of being in the top 3. So a lot of mock drafts are looking at guys like Cortland Sutton. I'm not, like I said, if they're going to move up and get one of these quarterbacks, they're not going to have that number 22 pick in most scenarios. So I think he's kind of out of the picture. So you'd really want to look at round 2 and round 3 for guys you could get there. If a James Washington from Oklahoma State falls to 53 or 56, you'd be hard-pressed not to take the guy. He did a great job at Oklahoma State in terms of big plays down the field. He has a teammate in this draft who also could be an immediate contributor in the NFL. There's Michael Gallup out of Colorado State that I think the Bills could like. A lot of his draft reports don't come out and say that he's a great blocker, but a lot of the highlights I've seen of him on run plays, he's a willing blocker, and he's out there, and he's made some good blocks too. So if the Bills are still thinking we're going to be a run-first team, Gallup could be in play. There's a Memphis wide receiver, Anthony Miller, that I really like and that I think you could get in round 3. And it's not because I'm just a Notre Dame fan, but I really think that Equanimous St. Brown of Notre Dame has everything that you could look for in a potential number 1 wide receiver in terms of size, speed, and separation. I think he can do it all, and I just think that his draft stock has been hurt the last few years because of the quarterback play at Notre Dame. So he's a guy that if the Bills could get him on day 2, I think he could realistically come in and compete for the number 2 job and take over as the number 1 receiver as early as 2019, especially if Kelvin Benjamin leaves after the season.
When you mentioned 2019 as well, and we've seen, I think the one thing, and this just, I popped it back in my head is just thinking about it as we're talking here, you kind of look at what Los Angeles has done with the Rams with Jared Goff, and you see how they're more willing to put money into signing players. They're putting more credence into acquiring guys. They go out and get Brandon Cooks for Jared Goff. And I almost wonder if that might not be what happens with Buffalo, where they'll say, okay, yeah, we'll go out and get the quarterback this year. He may not have the targets he'll need this year, but we'll almost evaluate on the fly, determine who's good, who will fit, who won't fit. Like you mentioned, go out, draft a guy or two that'll fit your system, that'll fit your offense. And then maybe next year when you have all that cap money that the Buffalo Bills are going to have, maybe go out and sign a guy or two or trade for a guy who may be available, something like that. So, I mean, on the surface, it doesn't look great, but in the long run, in the long term, I don't think things are going to be too bad for the Buffalo Bills.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And the Rams are a great example of today's NFL. And I think the Eagles would have been a great example of that too if Carson Wentz had stayed healthy, although they won the Super Bowl with Nick Foles. But with these young quarterbacks that are coming on, like Wentz and like Goff, you have a 5-year window where they're under that rookie contract before you have to pay them that $100 million, $100 million plus contract. So teams like the Rams, you might say, how are they going to pay all these guys long term? Well, they're not. And Ndamukong Suh is probably gone after this year. They have to get Aaron Donald locked up long term. They might try to lock up Cooks long term before even the start of the season because he could be that number 1 guy for Goff in the years that come. So when you have these young quarterbacks, which the Bills could be in the same boat as early as this year, you have to look at it as this is a 5-year window to win a Super Bowl. Now, are the Bills in position to win a Super Bowl this year, even if they get Rosen or if they get Mayfield or whoever their quarterback number 1 is? I would say no. The defense is going to keep them in a lot of games, just like the defense did early last year and then late in the year as well. They had that little skid in the middle of the year where people were gaining yards and scoring on them at will. But for the most part, that defense took pretty good gains last year from the Rex Ryan regime to the Sean McDermott regime. So this year, no. But like you said, 2019, if Rosen or Mayfield show signs as a rookie that, hey, this is our guy and we need to build around him, you're right. You go out and you trade for a number 1 wide receiver, or you find a guy in the draft or free agency, you shell out big money. because you have a window where you can win a Super Bowl before you have to pay that quarterback big money. And we've seen it time and time again. When the quarterbacks get the big money, it's very hard for a team to consistently get to the playoffs, get to the Super Bowl. Say what you will about Tom Brady, but he's always reworking his deal, and he's still getting the money and bonuses and in other ways, but he's always reworking his deal. And you look at a team like Seattle, they paid Russell Wilson, and now all of a sudden you're seeing that they're dismantling that team little bit by a little bit. And a lot of it has to do with once you pay the quarterback, it's hard. It's very hard in this league to put together a team that can consistently get you to the playoffs and obviously the end goal, which is the Super Bowl.
You just have to be more creative. That's all. And that's that. I mean, like you mentioned, the Rams are doing it for sure because, they have the ability to try to win now. I mean, I don't know if they are ready to take the next step to be a Super Bowl contender. They're pretty good last year. We'll see how they come out again this year, but they've done enough where even if Jared Goff regresses or Todd Gurley regresses just a little, that defense is going to be miserable to play against. So that's kind of what you want to see the Bills do, where the Bills can build up their defense and they can make it tough to play against. So, they keep the offense in the game. I mean, that's really what they've done for Tyrod for years now. So if you can have a defense that keeps the offense in the game, you've still got a very healthy LaShawn McCoy, despite the fact that he's getting old. And you'll have a young quarterback in either A.J. McCarron or Josh Rosen or Baker Mayfield or whoever it may be under center that you might be able to find, like we said, that found money thought where, you may go out and, yeah, this team's good enough to go 8-8 and you finish, 10-6 because you have a guy who pulls out a couple games late or just dominates. You never know. I mean, that's the hard thing about football with it only being 16 games, that so much can change so fast and stealing a victory here or there can mean the difference. So just, I'm very ready for next season, but again, I'm keeping an eye on the process and saying, hey, this is year one or year two of the process, year one of a new quarterback potentially. So you got to just keep that all in perspective because yes, you want to be the Patriots every year. You want to be winning 12, 13 games. And yeah, we have an easy path to the Super Bowl, but then again, you actually have to get yourself there. So when you are a team that like Seattle, what Seattle was doing, where they were able to take out expensive players and get younger players and pop them right in and say, yeah, okay, you may not be as great, but you're still good enough. You actually have to get to that point. And I think that's where Buffalo's working towards right now, which is fun to watch, but ideally they'll be able to make a nice little leap here very soon.
Yeah, I agree completely. I mean, that at the end of the day, you're in this league to win Super Bowls, and the good thing for Buffalo and all the teams in the AFC East is the Patriots, I don't want to say their run's going to be over soon, but sooner rather than later, Tom Brady and Bill Belichick are going to be gone. There was already speculation at the end of this year that you don't know how much longer Belichick's going to have. Is Josh McDaniels going to be the next head coach? And he's said that it hasn't been the case. That's not why he came back. But you'd like to think that there's some kind of, as long as we don't implode offensively, you're our guy when Belichick retires. But when Brady goes, they're going to see a sharp decline in play because they don't have anyone right now that you can say, oh, yeah, well, so-and-so can step right in, where Garoppolo, he went to San Francisco and he looked like he could have been that guy, but they kind of ran out of options with him in terms of they knew they couldn't get him to sign a cheap deal. They knew he'd get paid in free agency one way or another from another team, so they traded him for whatever they could get. So, the Bills are in this position now, and I would argue the Jets are in this position now where their roster is looking better on paper when they're going to get that quarterback in the draft at number 3, where they can position themselves for the short term, but also for the post-Brady and Belichick era, where they can say, we can put ourselves in position to be the top dog in the AFC East.
It's so weird to think about punting for the next couple of years, but you know what? Quietly build. Make sure you can, like you said, make sure you can win a couple playoff games while you still have your quarterback on his rookie deal before you have to start paying people. Get that kind of system built, because as hard as it is to say, Brady and Belichick are going to be around for a little while longer, but they're not going to be around forever. So get ready to jump on that gas pedal. And like we always say, just keep trusting that process, because you know what? what else can we do at this point? I mean, it's already worked so far, and the Bills seem to be heading in the right direction. It just I'm sure, as you know, when you get impatient with a sports franchise, it's hard to keep your logic in a single fashion or a single line fashion. You want to always just say, why can't they do this now? And I always feel like that, why can't the Bills be great now? But patience will pay off in the long run. We hope. But like we say, if nothing else, Brady and Belichick won't be around forever, which then will open up the AFC East for somebody to win. And hopefully it's not the Jets.
Without a doubt.
Well, hey, Ryan, I appreciate you joining us. I do want to say to everybody, we've got the NFL draft coming up here April 26th. Get ready for the fireworks. I think something I'm going to have to say, just by judging by what we're reading and hearing on Twitter, something's going to happen here soon. We whether Buffalo moves up or Buffalo says, hey, we're going to stay pat, we're going to stand pat, whatever it may be, something is going to happen. Keep an eye out for that. Like I said, you can follow us over at betterliveThanDead.com, on Twitter at BLTD Sports, Facebook.com/BLTD Sports. Also check out 26shirts.com for the latest 26 shirts offering. You can follow Ryan on Twitter at Ryan Talbot Bills. And again, Ryan, I want to thank you for joining the podcast today.
Hey, my pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
Not a problem. And as we always say, keep on trusting the podcast and go Bills.
The preceding presentation has been brought to you by the Gear Network.